as I mentioned briefly before, I got into swarm trapping. I've been trapping swarms for quite a few years now. It hasn't been like a major part of what I've been doing, but it's been a little bit because I wanted to get some feral bees from my area. I did a bit of trapping in Arkansas, and that's where I learned to do it. And then recently I've been talking to a guy named Jason Bruns. He's a pharmacist who lives in Indiana. And if you've listened to my podcast, by the way, how many people have listened to my podcast? A couple, very good. Chris has been on the podcast, so if you want to go hear him, go check out that episode. Talking to Jason Bruns, he is really got into swarm trapping out in Indiana, and he catches tons and tons of swarms, dozens every year. And we kind of have been developing this idea of abandoning, for the new beekeeper, abandoning buying packages because there's so many problems with packages. And instead, catching swarms because they're so much easier to come by, they're free, and more importantly, they're free. So I'll just get some introductory information here. I'm not going to go like deep into the weeds, but basically a swarm it's bees reproducing, right? All animals need to reproduce to perpetuate their genetics, create offspring, and those offspring create offspring. So this is what the bees are doing. It is completely natural. It's normal. Beekeepers have tried to get away from they call swarmy bees, and that's okay, but swarming allows the bees to reproduce and to through that process adapt to new changing conditions. And bees, when they swarm, they don't travel really far. Like I talk about commercial beekeepers driving bees thousands of miles across the country. A swarm's only going to go maybe a couple miles away. So when you start with one hive, it then spreads slowly outward. And that's how bees deal with disease. They don't have an immune system quite the same way that we do, right? Their blood isn't even how their oxygen gets through their bodies. They have a different physiology than we do. So they're much more reliant upon breeding and adaptation to deal with disease problems. Swarms come from two main places. Number one is healthy hives. Everybody's had a swarm, lost a swarm. And feral hives. Where they don't come from is unhealthy hives, hives that aren't doing well. Hives that aren't doing well don't swarm, and if they're really not doing well, they abscond, which is when they leave. The whole hive leaves and goes to a new spot. And an absconding hive, that's an entirely separate thing from a swarm. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, but we have to separate those two. The biggest way to check is on the difference between those two is the time of year. There's a main swarming season usually in the spring. You'll get a few swarms here and there through the later part of the year, but the later part of the year, more of those are going to be hives that have absconded, right? They've got some problem in their colony, and if it's a box, maybe there's a pesticide problem, pesticide buildup, and they leave. Maybe there's a mouse nest in their hive. Maybe there's somebody's bothering them a lot. Skunks cause problems. Whatever the problem is, they're jumping ship. Okay? Where do they go? Optimally in nature, they're going to end up in this area probably more commonly in tree hollows, in big trees with that have been hollowed out by some combination of birds or maybe termites, maybe rotting, maybe a tree broken off a branch, and that kind of leaves a hole that the bark and the live part of the tree grows around, but the dead part of the tree rots out in the middle, the heartwood. In other places, especially in the desert, which I wish I had some pictures of that. I was down in Arizona this last weekend for a conference, and the place we were staying was out in the desert, and I found, well, somebody told me, but I had to go find it. I found a hive that was living in space down in the rocks, right, in the ground. You don't have, I don't think there's quite as much ground hives around here, but in the desert where there's not as many trees, you're going to find a lot more ground hives. And there's a study that I read a while back that said that there might be up to several hundred hives per square mile in the ground. The desert is a surprisingly fertile place for bees. You might think of it as dry and desolate, and it generally is, but when cactus and other desert plants bloom, they go all out. They compete for attention from the pollinators because it's so vital that they're able to reproduce. So these cactus blossoms produce an incredible amount of honey and pollen, or nectar and pollen. Other places, because people are around, you'll find hives in junk, basically. We've heard of hives in gas cans, hives living in attics, in bell towers and churches, eaves, under cars, all sorts of different places. Very common places in chimneys, in empty bricks, cavities in walls, lots of different places. So why do we catch them? Number 3 is they're free. That's like the most important thing to me because, as I said before, when beekeepers start out and they invest money in bees, when you invest money in something, it ties you to it in a very real way, right? That's why we have to have insurance on things, because it is a problem if we lose expensive things. Bees aren't like expensive like a car or a house, but they did cost us money, and that money is valuable to us. And so when we introduce cost into the beekeeping equation, we tie ourselves to that, and we, in a sense, we make our beekeeping experience more about fear than optimism. We're afraid of losing our bees. And that's not a good place to operate from. And I feel that that's a huge reason why a lot of new beekeepers quit when they come to their first failure, because they've spent so much money on it and now it's died, and it's not healthy. So when you are a good swarm trapper, you get to the mindset of, even if these bees die, which many times they don't because they're feral and they're adept at surviving, even if these bees die, no big deal, I'll just catch some more next year. I liken it to fishing, and so does Jason. Oh, by the way, some of the pictures you'll see in this slideshow are from Jason. You can check out his website at letembee.com, letmbee.com. He is an excellent resource. I've had him on the podcast multiple times, and we'll have him multiple times again. So you can check those out. And he's also in the midst of writing a book, which he sent me the first manuscript this last week, and I spent a couple of days reading it. Excellent stuff. I mean, top on my list of beekeeping books right now. So that should be out a little bit later this year. You can check out his book. He talks about it like fishing, right? Like before, we talked about bees and mites like gazelles and cheetahs. With catching swarms, we're going to talk about fishing. So when you are fishing and fish gets away, do you give up? No. You put another hook on, you put some more bait on, you throw it back in. In fact, if it gets away, that's even more reason to keep fishing, right? Because you know it's there. Another important thing is when we're catching swarms, a lot of the swarms that we're going to be catching hopefully are coming from the feral population. And what I like to be is, I call it interactive with the feral population. So I'm catching swarms from the feral population. These are healthy wild bees. And I'm also giving swarms back to the feral population. So optimally, the genetics of the feral population and the genetics of my bees are largely the same. And there's two main reasons for that. Number one is my bees are acclimated to the area. And number two is, if those bees are surviving, then my bees are surviving. And if my bees are surviving, then those bees are going to survive when they go back, right? If you're worried about starting treatment free, all feral bees are treatment free, obviously. And also whatever problem that might exist in a treated hive that you might be worried about picking up with buying a nuke, that's all going to be left back in their old hive. They're coming out, they're starting new, they're building all new comb. Pretty soon those bees are all going to die off, and whatever they might be bringing chemical-wise in their body is going to be left behind. And the only remnant will be the queen, and she'll probably be superseded before long anyway. They also leave behind a lot of the mites too. If you're concerned about small cell, if you're wanting to get into small cell beekeeping, which I'll be talking about last today, the best time to convert to small cell is with fresh bees. So a package isn't really optimal because it's not an actual swarm. Their attitude is different, right? A swarm has this attitude like they've gathered up all this honey. You can see them. I was down in LA last week, and I was staying with a friend, and he does swarm calls and swarm catches and cutouts and things. That's his business. And so we went out to a swarm call, and these bees, you could see them, their abdomens were totally distended. They were completely full of honey. That's one of the reasons why swarms don't sting, is because their physiology is such that when their stomach is full, they don't sting as well. And they also have nothing to defend, so they don't need to sting that either. And another good thing in catching swarms is if you have old rotten equipment that you don't feel comfortable using in your normal hive operations, you can repurpose that for swarm traps, and it works really well. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. What's my next? Yeah, I'm not there yet. So to keep with the fishing metaphor, when you're out fishing, there are a few main factors in whether or not you catch fish, right? That didn't help. That actually made it worse. Okay. So you're going to start with your bait, right? If you have good bait, you're going to catch more fish. If you're in the right place, right, the number of fish in the fishing hole, that's going to affect how many fish you catch. And I forgot the third one. I'll come back to it. So, the way I like to look at it is, again, from an engineering perspective, I use factors. If we start with the number one being 100% chance that we'll catch something, we can't work with that because there's not a 100% chance that you'll do anything in real life. I mean, except for gravity. You drop something, that's 100% chance it'll fall. But we start with factors, and these factors are additive. Each one of the factors that I'm about to tell you about will help you catch bees, but each one doesn't stand alone. They add on top of one another. The more of these factors you have, you can start with, you know, say a 10% chance of catching bees, and you add another thing, and you have now 20% chance, 30% chance, 40% chance. The more of these you add together, the closer to 100% you're going to get. Now, you're never going to actually get to 100%, and you know, that's just fact of nature. You don't catch a fish every time you go fishing. Sometimes you don't. So let's start with, and a lot of this comes from information that I've gleaned from my own experience, from other people's experience, and from Tom Seeley's study as well. You can check that out. The first one is you're going to want the right box volume, because the bees are going to need a certain size of box, a certain size of cavity, in order to store enough honey to survive through winter. And they know this. They don't know it the same way we do. They know things naturally. They know things through their genetics, right? They're looking for a certain, I hesitate to anthropomorphize too much, because I want us to understand that bees don't think the way they do. In fact, they don't really think. They operate on instinct, right? So, but we can think about it, compare it to ourselves, because we know ourselves, we know how we think. So we want to start with the size of the box. We want it to be big enough so that they can fill up and create a good sized cluster and good storage for winter, but not too big so that they can't fill it up and they have extra space that they have to defend. Right? Pretty basic. So let's start with the target size we're looking for is 35 to 60 liters, or 9 to 15 gallons, or 1.5 to 2 cubic feet. Those aren't exact numbers, but we're looking for about that size, and I'll explain a little bit more. So on the small end, you're going to be looking for an 8-frame deep. All right, that's going to be about 35 liters, right on the bottom end of what we're looking for. And Africanized bees actually will inhabit smaller boxes than that. So you can I tend toward the larger range because you're going to naturally select for, and people are watching this online, so I'm talking about Africanized bees. You don't have them around here, so you don't have to worry about it. Next would be a 10-frame deep. Those are 43 liters. That's probably the most common box that we use in beekeeping, so that's available. That's what you see right here. This is an old deep that I bought back in 2003. You can see this hole right here. The corner's gone, so I might use this for one of my hives, but it's going to allow an extra entrance, which I'm fine with. But instead, I can take this that's sitting around over the winter, and I can attach a top and a bottom and put some frames in it, stick it on a tree, and hopefully catch a swarm with it. So that equipment is now being used when otherwise it would have been in storage. 5-frame nuke is about 23 liters, so that's too small for the bees we're looking for, but it would catch Africanized swarms. But we can, if we use something like this, we can double it up, make 2, and we're back to 46 liters. So that's right in the range we're looking for. The Michael Bush Special, the 8-frame medium, is going to be about 24 liters, but we can double that up and make it 48 liters. Right, so we're right in the zone we want. I'm about to cough. This is mediums. I'm in the process of trying to slowly switch over to mediums as my old boxes die out. The bottom box on here is actually used to be a deep that the bottom rotted out of, and I trimmed it down to make it a medium, and now the top's rotting out of it too, so it's getting old. Put 2 of these together and we have 58 liters. So this is going to be about on the high end of what we're looking for. This is going to catch the biggest swarms. And the other thing is, a small swarm will probably inhabit a big box. A big swarm will not inhabit a small box. So you have to balance that. The next factor we're going to look at is used boxes. Bees love places where bees have been before, right? They know bees have lived here before. They come in, they smell it, they can tell. Bees have been successful here before, so we're going to move in. Of course, the thought process is not that complex, but so by using an old used box, you can add another chance that you're going to catch a swarm, because bees like that. If you don't do anything else but use a used box that's the right size with 1 comb of old brown comb, old black comb would be even better. That's going to be the 3 best things that you can do to start with. Right? Those are the most important factors. The right size box, an old box, and dark comb. Yes?
Read that, like on black stuff, the wax moths leave behind can be attractive.
Yes, wax moth poop, basically, yes. Yes. Wax moths are no problem. Bees, they put off their own smell, and the bees can be attracted to that too. Bees can clean. Bees really don't care. All the stuff that we worry about cleaning out comb and the webs and stuff, bees will do that. You don't have to worry about that. It's no problem.
Do you have frames in those boxes other than the old comb?
Yes, I do. That is later in a minute. I'll get to that one. All right, so those three, yes.
How is your lid affixed?
It's just screwed on there.
So you have to unscrew it in order to get into it?
Yes. You can do it other ways. You can strap it down. One thing you should not use is nails. Nails will work loose. But with these, I just use, on the tops and bottoms, I use 1 3/4 inch screws. And these bottoms are old lids that are no longer watertight, so I put them on the bottom. And the top is just a piece of plywood. Because I don't have, well, most of my tops are made out of plywood anyway, so. And then on the back side, there's a 1x4 here, and you can see it up here, and I put 4 screws in there. And I'll show you some pictures later if you don't want to use screws, or if you have somewhere where you're keeping your hive, where we're keeping your swarm trap, that someone doesn't want you to screw into their tree, which is fair. I mean, if you're gonna find a friend to host, you want to be nice to their stuff, if that's what they want. In this case, which one? Oh, this is my brother's backyard. He doesn't care. Oh, by the way, my brother, Parker Custom Pools. I'm representing the family business. Yes.
Is there an optimum height?
Yes, I'll get to that.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Are you filling those boxes up with 10 frames each? And are you using frames with comb on them, or are they just bare new frames?
Well, yeah, I can skip down to that one. Where is that one? I'm using, optimally use 1 frame of comb, because wax moths are going to be less likely to get it. If you have it full of comb, the bees aren't going to like it as much. They like some empty space. So that'd be a good place, if you can keep the hive nice and level, to put foundationless frames or foundation. If the hive is not level, you want foundation, because they'll build it in the frames. Otherwise, if you're using foundationless and you have a hive stuck up on a tree, you want to make sure it's level, or else they'll build, if you start on the top of the frame and it's sideways, they'll like build it diagonally, because they always build it vertically. The height we like is about 8 to 15 feet, but again, that does depend on your area. In the desert, where a lot of hives are in the ground, it might do better on the ground. Jason talks about a lot of his hives he puts on the ground now, or sets on something rather than being up in a tree, because number one, they're easy to get to, and they get plenty of hits for swarms. So again, it's a number of factors, and you can add them together. And even if your trap is not totally optimal, you still have a pretty good chance that you'll catch a swarm.
Where do you put them? How do you know where you're going?
Where do you put them? If you have bees at your own home, it's good to have swarm traps around close to your area, but you also want them spread out a little bit. Common places that are good, that I've had in my experience, and Jason talks about also, is on fence rows. Things that are easily visible, from the air, from a big tree that's a kind of a landmark, or a big tree in a fence row, or at the corner of a house. Last year I caught 3 swarms with boxes just sitting on my back porch. So my house is a landmark for the bees. Flying, have to fly around it. Hey, what's this? So that's probably why you find so many hives that are in eaves and houses and stuff.
So maybe someplace that the bees are already flying and coming to common.
Yes. But also, you're likely to not, if you put a swarm trap next to a hive, you're likely not to catch a swarm out of that hive. They're going to want to go somewhere else. Yeah.
Another stupid question. High ground, low ground? That's a West Virginia problem.
What do you
Would
mean?
you rather see it down in the valley or higher ground? Does it really make any difference?
That's a good question. I guess it would.
I always head up the ridge to forage on the trees and stuff up there.
Well, then that would be a good place for them. Or maybe in a protected area. For your habitat, if you do this year after year, you'll start to learn Not only where you catch swarms from, but also where you catch the best swarms from, the ones that work better.
And the other question is, you say an old comb. If the only thing you have available is, say, honeycomb, is that okay? Or would that attract the bees to fight over the residual honey? And
As long as it doesn't have honey in it. Old comb is better. Any comb will work. If you have some propolis, you can smear that inside there. That'll help give it that old box smell. Yeah.
Do you are you aware of any pheromone for collecting the swarms?
Yes,
That's
I'll-
better than another?
I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah.
Why would you not want, if there was corners that still had honey from another, that you could, like I also have, we have some comb, still got corners filled, why would you not want to do that?
What's going to happen when you put that out there is it's going to get robbed by we'd like it to get robbed by other honeybees, and so that would help with the scent, but it might get robbed by something else. You might have a mouse move in there, and if you have a mouse in there or any other pest in there, the bees are probably not going to go for it. Yeah.
I'm finding that some of my swarm traps that have honey in them, they get filled with ants too. So
Yes,
and they
ants.
don't leave, they stay there forever.
Yeah.
If you put your trap up at point A this year and you catch a swarm, can you put another, and you move it, can you put another trap back at point A, or do you have to wait till next year to put your trap back at point A?
Yes, you sure can. For whatever reason, it's not something that we totally understand. Swarms tend to alight on the same branches year after year after year. And you can see this, I recommend on YouTube there's a series of videos called Skep Beekeeping in the Heathland in Germany. And because they're beekeeping in skeps and they can't make splits with frames like we do, when it comes to swarm season, they just have a guy sitting out there waiting by the hives. You know, they have them all lined up in this little thing with a little shed over it. And he's waiting, and the hive swarms out, lands on a tree. He gets a ladder, climbs up there, collects it in a skep, goes sets it out. Another one comes out, lands in the same tree, lands in a different tree. But they tend to land in the same spots over and over again, which is why I hear people saying cut the branch off when you collect a swarm, and I'm going, don't cut the branch off. They like that branch. You can catch them there again. You can catch multiple swarms from the same spot in the same year, and then in years following, they'll tend to come to the same spots over and over again. Yeah, shake the branch, or use a bee brush or whatever. Or we were in LA. It was on a wrought iron gate, so we had to brush them off and vacuum them and stuff. Yes.
I'll make a comment to your question, and that is, this last year I did catch in a trap, I did a swarm, moved it into my yard. I put the trap right back in the same spot in just 2 or 3 days, and the residual bees, the ones who didn't come with, moved in, and I said, well, that's not gonna, they're probably gonna keep another swarm from coming out. So I took it down, left it up down for about 3 weeks until they disappeared, and put it back, and did in fact catch another swarm in that trap, in that same position, about 3 weeks after the put.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you, because I had a hive swarm last year. I know exactly where they went to. I couldn't get to them, but I could put a swarm trap there.
Yeah, that would be a great spot a good prospecting spot. Here's some just back to the box volume. I went down to my local firewood processor and bought these hollow logs from him for 2 quarts of honey, and so I'm gonna do some log hives. You can't really control the volume on these, but you can make them about the right size. Another one of the factors is the entrance size. If you have a hive that's got, you know, they're not gonna wanna guard an entrance this big. Likewise, they're not gonna be able to ventilate a hive with an entrance this big. So they like, this one right here is an 1.5 inch diameter hole. I think that's 1.5 inches. But they like a 2 square inch hole, and so that is an 1.5 inch diameter. So you can just use a drill or a hole saw for an entrance that way. Jason also he puts vents in them to keep them vented, but he screens over everything but the main entrance.
Can you go back?
Sure.
Is that a metal?
Yes.
Where?
This is a disc entrance. It's made of galvanized steel, and you can buy them from, I know you can get them from Man Lake and Kelly in Brushy Mountain. And they only cost, I think they cost less than $2 each. I love these because I put these on most of my nukes and a lot of my 10 frame boxes that I use for the base, because when you need to move the hive, you just flip it around and you've got this perforated area right here, and it leaves a vent, and you can open and close the hive easily, and they're really nice.
So
Yeah.
you don't have anything on the bottom, like the normal little entrance reducer, or you don't have that at all?
On these, no.
This is it on the swarm box?
On the swarm box, no. Yeah.
Wouldn't you be better off using a rectangular, low height entrance than that, because mice could go in that?
It is possible that mice can get in that, but mice can get in pretty much any slot that a bee can get in. Mice are very capable of flattening themselves down and squeezing through under doors and things. So the best thing for a mice guard is coarse screen, like ½ or smaller, but bigger than, the bee has to be able to get through. But mice are extremely able to get into places. And if they can't, they'll chew their way in. Question back there? Yeah.
What is the size of the square hole?
2 square inches. So that can be a round hole, or you can make that into a slot, 1 inch by 2 inches, or 4 inches by ½ an inch, or it's not super important, but it's one of those factors that they've found that's what the bees like. Yeah.
Comment from Claude, but I use this ½ inch hardware cloth.
Yeah.
Right. Staple gun. You staple over the hole. Mice don't get in, squirrels don't get in. Don't treat them.
Yeah, ½ inch hardware cloth makes an excellent mouse guard. Yeah.
Every winter I go in our old hardware cloth and mice.
But we don't have to worry too much about mice with these, because they're going to be usually up in a tree. You haven't had them? Okay, that does happen.
I had one up in a tree, just a regular mice took up.
Nice, yeah, that happens. That's true. Pheromone lure, this is going to really help. This is probably the 4th most important thing. And the most cost-effective way of building a pheromone lure is just take some essential oil, lemongrass essential oil. You can get that at any aromatherapy shop, or you can get it online. Really easy to come by, and it's really cheap. This bottle only costs a few bucks and lasts several years. So you can take, what I do is I take one of those pick a size paper towels, with the thinner towel strips, and take one of those, fold it in half, shove it in a sandwich bag, drop about 8 or 10 drops of lemongrass oil in there, and close it up. What's going to happen is that oil is going to slowly permeate through the plastic of the bag, and it'll last a lot longer than if you were just to dump the oil in there. If you just dump it in there, it might be overpowering to begin with, but then later on it might wear off. And so we use the plastic bag to keep it from going out too quickly.
Seal it completely?
Seal it completely, yeah. Yeah.
Do you use fresh lemongrass?
I don't know. I've never tried fresh lemongrass. We don't have lemongrass out where I am, so.
I have a plant at home that I brought in over winter, so I was speaking lemongrass plant.
That might work. Try it out. Height, like I said earlier, 8 to 15 feet, but you can fudge that a little bit. I like to use, this is just a 6-foot ladder. It's really easy. I just put it up against the tree, set the box on there. I can push the box up a little bit and then screw it in. I like to use 3½ inch star drive screws, because you don't have to push on them like you do with a Phillips head screwdriver to get them to screw in. You just kind of put it in and it goes right in. So I like the star drive. Yes, question?
Oh, it was going back to the pheromone.
Sure.
Do you use the queen when you pinch a queen? Does that?
Yes, I do use that occasionally when I remember it. I don't always remember it. I have a little quart jar full of alcohol with all the dead queens that I've had over the years. I throw them in there and then use like a Q-tip or a cotton ball and toss that in there.
So you would do that differently than the lemongrass oil?
I would just be in addition to the lemongrass oil, yeah. Yes.
How, this is a weird question, but I had the dead queen was like rearing planted in the comb. She's all dried up. I just sat her on a shelf. It's still there. Are they viable once it's been that dead? Are you putting your queens in your alcohol fresh, or will that dry? I've been dead a while.
That's a good question. I don't think it can hurt anything. You're just going to have more in the jar. A lot of mine, when I find them in a dead out and stick it in the pocket in my bee suit, and a couple months later it might be before I remember to pull them out. So I don't think it matters a whole lot. And there's also, you can also buy pre-made lures, like Swarm Commander is one, which is just a synthetic copy of the bee's nascent off pheromone. And another one you can find, pretty much any beekeeping supply place is going to have artificial swarm lure, and you usually pay a couple of bucks for one of those, but for the price of 3 swarm lures I can buy a bottle of lemongrass oil and catch hundreds of swarms. Do you have a question?
Is honeybee healthy one of the treatment things that you stay away from?
Personally, yes.
So there's other stuff in it.
Yeah, and there's no direct evidence that essential oils work as a treatment anyway, so I just don't bother. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is,
One question.
sure.
Permeation of plastic. I mean, single line plastic permeates, but does that permeate enough?
It works. Like I know because if I open up one of my old traps and I can smell it, and I can smell the lemongrass oil through it, so it does work.
Because water doesn't get through, you know that.
It's not technically true that water doesn't get through.
Yeah.
Water gets through so slowly as to appear that it doesn't get through. Yeah. But oil, because it's more similar chemically to plastic, will permeate more quickly than water.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the queen and the alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
what about a queen cell to develop a queen? That was opened up and put in the alcohol.
Sure.
Effective?
I don't know. It might. Can't hurt. I just throw all dead queens in there. It doesn't bother anything. One of the great things is that you can use old rotted boxes like I mentioned before, and all the boxes that I showed on the pictures before were still structurally sound enough so that they could be just stuck up there. But what if you have a box that has like a missing side, or the corner's completely rotted out, so it's like in 4 pieces, like doing like this. One of the things you can do, you can see in Jason's picture here, is he likes to put a 2x2 stick of wood in here in each corner. See those? And then what that allows him to do is to stick the box back together structurally, and then 8 frames will then fit right in between those, leaving a gap on the outside. And the bees are okay with that extra space, and they'll probably build off of that central bait comb that you have in there. And then you'll probably find the box before they build in the outside. And even if you don't, and they built a comb on the outside there, you can just trim it down a little bit and stick it in an empty frame with rubber bands and keep it. So you can reduce then even the number of frames that you're putting into the bait hives. Ways to attach it, like I showed you with the 2x4 before. I also, because I had them laying around, I had these 1x2s. And so I stuck these 1x2s, 2 of them, to the back of the hive about 4 inches apart, and then put a screw in the top and bottom of each one. That gives a little bit of a wider stance than the 1x4 does, so they're a little more sturdy on the tree. And if you don't want to screw into the tree, you can do what Jason does here. He uses a short length of like a dog chain or something that you can get at any hardware store, and he makes a loop around the tree, and the box has has a hole right here that it goes through with 2 little hooks, hooks it together, and it'll kind of hang there, you know, just kind of looped around the tree. And then he takes a strap, like a cargo strap, and straps around there, around the top part, so that it holds it against the tree. And then he'll put some shims, because he uses all foundationless, so he needs his swarm traps to be nice and level. He uses these little boards as shims to level up the hive. So those are some good ways to do it. You can also, like I said, set them on the ground. You can set them on, if you go with the slope of the roof, so the frame's not tipped sideways but vertical, you can set it on a roof in the shade, like an asphalt roof where it's not going to slide off. As long as it's in the shade and doesn't get too hot, you can set it on a roof and have no problem. Yes?
Are those boards screwed directly into the bee box?
These ones?
Yeah.
Yes.
So how do you get it down?
I just unscrew it with a screw gun. How do you mean?
On the one on the left?
Mm-hmm.
You open up the box and you unscrew?
No, I leave the boards on, but the boards are screwed to the tree. The boards are also screwed to the box. So I unscrew the boards from the tree, take the whole thing down, and then I can do other stuff with it. I'm not going to try and work on the box at all while it's on the tree. That's dangerous. I mean, fall off, and it'll probably hit me on the way down. Did you have a question?
He has a lot of holes on the right there.
Yes. He likes to do vents. He finds that helps with wax moths, and it also helps to get the smell out so that bees can smell it. But the only entrance is this one right here. He uses the disc entrances also. And the rest of these are vents that are screened from the inside. And that also helps with transportation when he takes them home, keeps them plenty ventilated. Any other questions? Yes.
I'll face backwards.
Sure.
I'll make a comment, and that is, these can get kind of heavy, heavier than I want to handle up on a tree. And so I made a long pole with a sort of V-shaped thing that leans against the branch above the thing, and then I pull it down and tie a rope on this, tighten the rope before I then unscrew around here, and then I can go down to the bottom of the step ladder or just let it down from the pulley. And that makes me feel much safer than trying to handle all this up on a step ladder.
I'm young-ish, so the most important thing is safety. If you're not comfortable messing around with a 50 or 60 pound box on top of a ladder, don't bother. Do like this one right here is only chest high. So if you can, you know, it's just this high, it's off the ground, away from small animals. Hopefully they won't try to climb up and mess with it, but be safe. It's no fun. I can tell you, falling off a ladder while you're holding something heavy, I've done it. I landed on a pile of bicycles. It was interesting. Another one of our factors, if you want to use, you don't want too much light. Like vents are okay, but if you use something like a 5-gallon bucket, which is about a useful size, you could use that. The problem is with like a white or a clear bucket, you're going to get too much light in, and the bees aren't going to be interested in that. They like a dark cavity, and they also, like we talked about earlier, they like it to be free of pests, mice, wasps, hornets, all that stuff, ants. If there's something already there, they're not going to move in on them. And then last one is weatherproof. If you've got something that leaks and it's getting a lot of water in it, and they find a moist box, they're not gonna like that. So, what is the danger? You might think it might be risky to put some of your equipment out, and it can be. This is squirrel damage, because squirrels are jerks. And they like to get into everything. I've had this happen to my boxes. They've chewed them to the point where they're completely useless. They just chew right through it. They're fuzzy-tailed rats. But since you're going to be wanting to use your oldest boxes for this, if you do have damage, you've lost something that was on its way out anyway. So it's all about keeping the right tools in the right spot. The other really fun thing is when you're making up your swarm traps, keep them outside. You will catch swarms in piles of boxes just laying around. It'll work. Do you have any questions before we go to lunch? Yes?
Is there a preferred direction that the entrance should face, such as east, west, north, south?
Seeley's study showed that they preferred a south-facing entrance, but I've heard anecdotal evidence from other people that say that they like different other facing entrances. You'll find bees in the wild who live in places that the entrances face all different directions, so I'm not 100% going to give advice on that because there seems to be conflicting evidence. Yeah.
I've always heard that when there's a swarm, the queen is inside the swarm being protected by all the bees. I watched a podcast or webinar the other day, and they said that the queen was always on the outside of the swarm. I was just wondering about your experience.
I've heard both of those as well, and I've heard people catching the swarm. When they're catching swarms, they'll find the queen. I haven't been really good at that. If you look at these pictures here, can you see any queens? I mean, I'll give you $1 if you can find a queen.
Leave that up. I'll give you $10.
Yeah, we'll leave that up for a while. I don't know. I did have one of my nukes swarmed out and landed on a branch, and I caught the swarm and put it in another nuke, and they swarmed out and landed on the branch again. So I dug through the swarm and I found the queen and put her in a cage and put that in the nuke, and then they stayed in the nuke. So it is possible to find the queen. She wasn't on the outside of that swarm, so I don't know about that. Any other questions?
Why would you want to separate her from the swarm?
I wanted to catch her and make sure that the swarm stayed in the box because they kept swarming out again. And that was one of my new queens that I wanted to keep. I had already lost, we had that particular batch of queens. It was a really nice warm couple of days, and before I could get them moved from 3-frame nukes to 5-frame nukes, they started swarming. And so I lost one, saw them fly up over the trees, and the second one I caught, and that's when I got my trip together.